Hello, Linda. How are you? We actually have Jason joining us right now, so I'm just going to bring him on really quick. Hang on a second.
Perfect.
Hey,
Perfect.
Jason, how's it going?
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey
So
there.
we weren't sure if you were showing up. So
Am I late?
no, you're
Oh,
on
okay.
right on, perfectly on time. Normally we sort of put people behind the scenes, like in the green room, but that is good. We're just glad that you're joining us tonight. I'm Cathryn. This is Linda, and thank you for joining us on the show tonight. We truly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Cathryn and Lynda, both of you guys for having me on.
Pete
Sorry
couldn't
that
join us
Peter couldn't
tonight.
be here.
Yeah, he's he unfortunately Pete hurt his back tonight, guys, so he won't be joining us tonight. But that's okay. That's okay. We're just thrilled that we have you on. And so welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank-
Good to be here.
we were checking out I was checking out earlier before the show your IMBD, and you have quite an impressive array
I wouldn't
of
call it
movies. And
impressive.
it's pretty impressive. I would say it's pretty impressive.
Appreciate
Very
that.
impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah. How did you get into this? How did you start? Like did it, so I got to ask,
Yeah.
did it start with a paranormal experience of some sort or a haunting, or did you just kind of go into the movie industry?
It's funny that you asked that particular question. It did not actually start with a paranormal experience, although the very first thing I ever did had to do with paranormal. Um, at least it did for me, not for everybody else that was with me. We essentially, the very first project I ever did, essentially we were breaking into a local haunted house, so to speak. I know there's like a word for it when people go around to like these abandoned places and check them out
Right.
for paranormal reasons, and that's essentially what we were doing before the internet had that all over the place. You know, it wasn't a thing back then. But
Yeah.
yeah, but to answer your first question, how I got into it, really, it's kind of strange. My aunt, for whatever reason, it made no sense to me at the time, and still really doesn't, because I had nothing to do with film.
Right.
But she would always like make these comments like, "Oh, you're gonna be like Spielberg," and just like out of the blue kind of thing. Like, I don't know why.
Yeah.
I was an artist. I would draw at the time. But for whatever reason, like that's what she felt like. I mean, I wish I achieved that, but I'm happy where I'm at. But that's kind of like where I came from. And once I discovered like really who he was, I mean, obviously at the time, I'd seen, Jaws, E.T., all the classics of
Right.
his and whatnot. So, but I didn't really know who he was, as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And once I did, that's kind of like, it kind of sparked the interest of doing it. And yeah, I guess you could say it was all uphill from there. Downhill, uphill, both. Roller coaster.
That's really
You
cool.
go ahead,
That's
Linda.
really
Sorry.
cool. Sorry, Kathy. No, honestly, I mean, for those of you out there who are just tuning in, I mean, Jason D.Morris. I mean, I was so fascinated because I, like Kathy, looked into you and did a little research. And I mean, gosh, you're known for your feature films. I mean, Betrayal, Hell
Hmm.
House, Collapse, Dark Winter, Millennium After the Millennium. That's one that I wasn't familiar with, so
Hmm.
now I got to do that. Got to find that. But I was really impressed with all of that, and also co-director of the Dark Fest, and that's
Oh
the
yeah.
one
Hmm.
that showcases like all the darker side of entertainment, and that's really fascinating. And I was going to ask you the same kinds of questions as Kathy, but I'm thinking, okay, there's got to be this fascination with the darker side. And have you always been kind of fascinated with that kind of stuff?
You know, yes, I have been, and I think it really it came from seeing the wrong movies too young. What I consider them the right movies, but I guess for a child, had the '80s been more helicopter parentish as it is these days,
Mhm.
I think that wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And I'm glad that it did, because I think a lot of creativity, I don't want to say like creativity doesn't stem in, light fare as well, but I really think that some of the most creative sort of minds stem from kind of the darker elements of life, whether it's life imitates art imitates life kind of thing. But I started really young seeing movies like Evil Dead and things like that. So it sort of sparked a horror element to me, but also the comedic side of it, which I haven't really dabbled in too much in terms of my career. I want to. I've done a little bit, but not really a lot, and certainly haven't really done any like horror comedy or anything like that. But paranormal has always been something to me that has truly frightened me in a way, because it's different than say a serial killer or a murderer or like Jason or Michael Myers or whoever, you know what I mean? Like those are things you can kind of explain or tangible or there, but
Or
it was
you
always
can
like,
kill.
yeah, well, depends on the sequel, but yeah.
Right.
But, you know, the paranormal was always this sort of like fantastical kind of element where you can't really explain a lot of things that we experience in life. And we've tried to, I think as humans, try to do that, try to figure out why certain things happen or why we experience things or why we feel like we see or feel certain things. And so the paranormal aspects of, I mean, anything really, not just film, but it all really intrigues me greatly. I mean, it's bled over into my aesthetic in terms of like architecture or art or any of those sort of things. I'm a huge fan of directors like Alex Proyas, who did The Crow and Dark City. You know, that sort of like dark Gothic kind of aesthetic is something I very much enjoy.
Right.
So I think all that sort of culminates into that kind of. I'm not. I know I do a lot of horror type stuff, but I'm not huge on horror because I don't really like gore, and a lot of people like kind of call me on that, and I'm like, I just it's gross. I think it's really cool. Like there's a lot of special effects out there that I think are really neat that they can accomplish. But if something is too realistic to me, I just can't stand it. Like this isn't horror at all, but my wife loves Grey's Anatomy.
Right.
And there's scenes in that show where I'm just like, oh, and I can't watch. Right. And then like there's certain horror films that she finds that are extremely gruesome. And I'm like, I don't find them gruesome at all because they're unrealistic to me.
Right. Which films would that be, just for as an example?
Oh, I mean, it could be anything from like a Tom Savini like film, or you know, like a Dawn of the Dead, or even like more newer stuff, Don't Breathe, or the newer Evil Dead movie. Anything that, you know, kind of has over the top kind of gore. Walking Dead, yeah, like it doesn't bother me really at all. Like there's certain scenes that they're obviously doing just over the top. So it's less impactful, I think, because of that.
Right. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned, you know, growing up, you know, in that era, because, you know, when I was growing up, you know, at our local theater or our local museum, they used to play old Hitchcock films when I was little.
I would love that.
And it was, and every month it was a new horror film. So my mom, I remember sitting in my stroller and watching Psycho, you know, The Birds, you know, all of these you know, horror films. And so, you know, that's kind of what I grew up in. And a lot of people, you know, still say, oh, The Exorcist, I can't watch it. And I was like, dude, I saw that in the theater, I think. Like, I don't know.
Right.
Like, I remember watching it, you know, and it was like, whatever. Like, it literally just didn't affect me. But when it comes to the gore, I couldn't, you know, I couldn't, it like, you know, any of the Saw movies, well, except for the first one. The first one was, you know, it had a psychological effect to it.
Right.
The rest of them, you know, it was just blood and gore and heads flying off and stuff. I had no interest in that.
Same here. Yeah.
You know, but it's so, you know, paranormal movies. Yeah. I actually really like the paranormal movies because there was that element to them, you know, that kind of gave you that different perspective on things. But there were some that were just, you know.
Oh yeah, you're always going to find that campy or kind of cheesy type stuff or over the top, but I do think that because it's something that's not I guess I don't want to say explainable or scientifically explainable, but it's always that sort of fringe kind of science where you know, some people will either take it seriously or they don't. And I feel like films can, when they do take it seriously, like you can find a really high quality film that's thought out and has sort of a deep message or meaning that's
Yeah.
based in that supernatural sort of element that, you know, can touch people in certain ways, you know, that you really couldn't do with a regular film, like a drama or something. It's completely something different, because I think a lot of people experience things throughout life, and sometimes they're looking for other answers that, you know, aren't necessarily normal answers, for lack of a better word. So I think that those, really can affect people differently.
So here's a, have you had paranormal experiences yourself?
You know, I have. There's several different things that have kind of happened throughout my life, but I've always sort of I've never really like pushed this sort of idea about paranormal. Like, I don't like to tell people like, oh, this happened, oh, you know, and like spook
Right.
people kind of thing, because people have that tendency to be like, okay, whatever. But like just random things, and it's a weird sort of thing, because everybody could find an explanation to anything that they want to, like, no matter what it is, paranormal or not. You can always explain stuff away. Maybe some things are harder than others, but I mean, I could go back to something that happened fairly recently. Probably about a month or two ago, my wife and I were laying in bed and we're watching a movie, and she has these old like 1980s like glowworm figures, like these little like 2-inch high figures.
Okay. Yeah.
And she's got them all lined up on this like shelf. And just randomly, one of them just goes whoosh, and just falls on the ground. Like, there's like, it's one of those things like, well, there's no fan on, you know what I mean? There's no explanation to it really, but she's always, since we've lived in this house, has always felt like there's been a presence here, her particularly. I've never really necessarily felt that, but she might be more in tune than I am. But she's always like, you know, sort of let me know when she has those strange experiences. She's like, that's not the first time that's happened. And I'm like, really? You know, because it was really like out of the blue. We're just watching a movie and this thing just kind of flies off the top of the thing.
Right.
Just one of them, you know,
Maybe
in the
didn't
middle.
like the movie.
Whatever. Yeah, I have no idea. I have no idea who owned it before, or like what it might have been. You know what I mean? I've got no explanation for it, but I don't really honestly look for one. I just kind of take it as this is an experience, it's something we can't explain. We sort of look at it like that's not natural, I guess, in like a normal environment. So to us, it sort of feels like there is something more kind of to it. What it is, I have no idea. My wife feels like it's her grandmother who passed away, who stayed with us for a while. She feels like her presence is kind of here, but I don't know, and wouldn't even know who to ask to find out, or, you know, really sort of corroborate that kind of idea. But I believe what she believes. I believe what she feels. Right. You know, so you know, I go with that, and I'm not a disbeliever at all. I don't look for it though, unless I'm like my first project, going out and, you know, entering this supposed haunted house kind of thing. At that point I was looking for it, but you know, my day-to-day life, I don't really look for those things. They just kind of happen occasionally. Yeah.
So when you broke into that house, you entered that house sort of inadvertently, did you experience anything that you couldn't explain, or was it just sort of that rush of being in a purportedly haunted location?
You know, I was with someone who was older than me, and they were more about safety, which is good. It's great to have somebody there, because we were entering an inhabited place that had not been inhabited for probably 50 years or so. It was very dilapidated. It was like this 3-story, like Gothic kind of, it's not a mansion, but it was a big house, right?
Probably full of asbestos.
Most likely, yeah. I mean, it definitely had been used by the homeless, or, you know, whoever. Like, there had definitely been people in there at some point. But this is I was young. I was like 16 at the time. Like, laws and things like that was not even on my radar, you know, so I'm not the same person anymore. But I would never do that without permission these days. But at the time, it was just exciting to do it. It was interesting. I was just discovering this film thing. I got my first camera. I'm like, let's go film this. Blair Witch, I think. No, this was before Blair Witch. I can't remember. There was something around that time that kind of sparked my haunted house kind of interest. But so as far as something happening, we did hear noises, and we didn't see any sign of there being other people there. I mean, there were signs that people had been there, but not currently. We literally had to break in. Like there was no openings anywhere to
Right.
get in or out. We had to remove things in order to enter. So we never found anybody there, but we did hear noises, and there was 4 of us. And I mean, we were dead quiet because we were just worried about getting caught, kind of thing. But we would hear noise. There were some noises upstairs. There was noises in another room, and it was all really unexplainable stuff. We couldn't figure out where it came from, what it was. Maybe it could be settling. Maybe who knows what. Maybe there was somebody in the house. I don't know. But we never did find anybody or anything.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Right? Yeah. You know, and it's one of those things, like, I don't really tell anybody that because there's like, yeah, right, whatever. There's probably something that, I mean, maybe, but I don't know. I mean, we heard noises, and
Yeah.
it was spooky to begin with. Like, I didn't need to hear noises to, you know, to sort of feel in the moment. It was, you know, it was a
think
legitimate, scary looking house.
I think just about every paranormal investigator, or, you know, people that are interested in the, you know, the other side of things. I think we've all done that at some point or another.
Mhm. Yeah, and you know, I wish that I had, you know, that again, it's like really before the internet was huge,
Yeah.
and so I honestly didn't know that ghosts, besides the movie Ghostbusters, I didn't know that like ghost hunting was a thing at all. Like, I had
Right.
no idea. And I wish I had, because like there's all kinds of like tools and things to do and listen for, and you know,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Never thought to like try to talk to ghosts or like any of that kind of stuff to engage. You know, and I wish I had at that time, because that would have really heightened the experience even more.
Oh, absolutely.
Groundbreaking, you know, groundbreaking. Well,
Yeah.
I have a question because I went on YouTube and I watched I wrote it down. Haunted eBay and Elmo Knows Your Name. So I went to watch that one, and
Yeah,
I thought, you know, how cool that is, because, I mean, haunted objects, everybody loves them. And if you're a paranormal investigator, I mean, I don't know one paranormal investigator who hasn't had a case with a haunted object. So I'm curious. I mean, why did you go that direction? I mean, we're all big fans of Johnny Zaffis and all of that haunted collector. But I
right.
mean, what sort of propelled you in that direction?
You know, it's I have, I mean, we've already talked about it, but I have this affinity for horror, sci-fi, paranormal type television shows and whatnot. And there was a show, there was a couple shows that actually that show sort of created the seeds in my mind of. There was it wasn't directly related to the movies, but there was a show called Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was a television
Yes.
show that was all about this curio shop that had these haunted objects in it. And that was really the basis for the idea of the show that we're doing on the Joe Blow Network. And I took that idea and I coupled it with this great sort of campy show that Jonathan Frakes did called Beyond Belief.
Yeah, I remember
And
that. I remember
yeah,
that.
and
Yeah.
so we just sort of meld the idea of Friday the 13th, the TV show, with Beyond Belief, and kind of, you know, just ran with that sort of idea. I personally have never had an experience with anything that I would have considered a haunted object per se,
Right.
but it fascinates
Slower.
me and intrigues me, because I really feel like even the walls of houses and the length of time that people live in these places or own these objects of, you know, maybe they're precious heirlooms or whatever they might be. There's got to be some sort of residual energy or some sort of exposure to whatever the essence of life is in these, you know, objects, really. So I believe that that's definitely a possibility as far as like the concept goes. As far as some of the more outlandish stuff that we see on the show, that we do on the show, like Haunted Elmo and things like that. I mean, you know, it's fun to see, but I don't necessarily know that I believe that Elmo wants to kill a little child. But I mean, what a trippy thing to happen. And it really did happen, you know, for whatever reason. This doll malfunctions and says, kill Danny, or whatever the kid's name is, which is like,
Wow.
whoa, that's leaving the house now, you know? Yeah.
Is this a series? Is it a
It's a
series?
series. Yeah, yeah.
Is this? I'm gonna have to check this
Mhm.
out.
Yeah, yeah, check it out. It's a fun
Yeah.
watch. Evan O'Hare is the host of the show, and he every week well, not every week. It's a monthly show, sorry, but every month he comes on and he'll introduce like anywhere from 2 to 3 objects, and he'll tell, and they're all based in reality. They're all things that
Right.
are in the world that are true stories, as far as what we can find.
Right.
And again, of course, you can explain stuff away, but I mean, they're pretty intriguing. Some of this stuff is, I mean, I wouldn't want to own, you know? Um, and there's been a few things like the Dybbuk box where, you know, the person that came up with that has publicly announced that he made it up or whatever it is. But I mean, there is sort of a lore of that type of
Mhm.
box, you know, in history. So who knows if that sort of thing really exists?
Well, I mean, really, everything is kind of has a premise to it, right? Like, you know, if we look at things, it just kind of depends on where somebody wants to bring that to, or what
Mm-hmm.
element they want to level it up, I guess.
Right. True. Yeah. Yeah. There's got to be a lot of embellishment, but I mean, again, like I said, I just think, you know, as long as we've been here, which is really a blip on the map as far as like how old the Earth is and whatnot. But
Yeah.
as humans, I do think that there's got to be some sort of residual energy that kind of rubs off into the world, and that I think would kind of explain a lot of things that we experience in life.
Yeah,
It's
I think
interesting that, you know, you say that because, you know, one of the things, you know, especially with you know, as investigators ourselves, you know,
Mm-hmm.
we walk into a place and you can feel the energy, and it may
Mm-hmm.
not even be a haunted energy. It could just be a residual energy of it's like walking into a room where, you know, people have been fighting,
Oh yes, yeah, I
right? And
totally agree with you.
you know, like they could be as happy as, you know, big smiles and everything, but you're like, no,
Yeah,
something's wrong here. And you got to think, you know, that energy itself, I mean, we really are only, no matter how big a house is, it's four walls,
mm-hmm.
yeah,
you know, ultimately, right?
Yeah,
And so where does that energy go? Well, it goes into the things that are around us, or, you know, gets attached to the things, you know, it's like parents that, you know, close the door and fight in their bedroom.
mm-hmm.
What usually happens there, it usually does end up in a divorce or a separation or something along that line, simply because of the fact that they're sleeping in the same room that they're fighting.
Yeah. They're just kind of like basking in the negative energy, so to speak. Yeah,
Right, exactly. So, you
yeah,
know, it spreads through. So when you look at it in that way, of course, you know, you can
yeah,
see where objects or even houses do have those elements to them. So that's kind of
yeah. No, I totally agree with that. You know, it's not, I wouldn't necessarily call it a paranormal movie per se, but there's this great movie from the 90s called Powder, about this kid who's albino. And at the end of the movie, he sort of like dissipates into energy. And that's kind of like where that sort of like, I feel that concept really is like, that's what I think we really kind of equate to like a soul.
yeah,
Um, and I don't, I mean, I guess it's easy to say, oh, or, you know, ghost afterlife kind of thing. But I think that it's really on a more scientific level is more of like about energy,
yeah,
and sort of that, um, residual or kind of almost like memory energy in a way, you know? And that's probably, I think, why a lot of times when paranormal investigators are experiencing certain things, maybe there's repetitiveness to it, or they hear the same thing over and over, or only like a one-off even, is it's sort of like an echo of sorts, more so to me than maybe an actual ghost that's trying to like scare somebody or reach out or something like that, which again, that's just my take, but you know, I know there's a lot of different ideas behind that, but that's kind of like the way that I would really look at it personally.
right,
oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you go into a location that has had something incredibly emotional happen there, either a suicide or a murder or something like
Mm-hmm.
that, there's so many people that can really attune themselves to that blast of incredible energy that happened however many years ago. I mean, that energy stays there. That imprint is still there. And I mean, as a filmmaker, that's got to be something that is really intriguing. And I was going to ask you too, because you've done feature films, but you've also done documentary films,
Mm-hmm.
and there's got to be a different process, right? A different, I don't know, a different way of approaching what you do. Which one do you prefer, or do you prefer one at all?
You know, that's I've been asked that before. It's a tough question, honestly, because they're so different. It's hard for me to really say. I lean towards feature films, like narrative feature films over documentaries, only because there's a certain creative aspect to it, and in more than a documentary is per se. Because with a documentary, whatever it is that you're trying to document is telling its story to you, and you're the essence documenting it, and then you're
Right.
going to cut it into something that's cohesive and tells that story to somebody. Hopefully you're unbiased in what you're doing. And with narrative films, there's a storytelling creative aspect to it that I really enjoy. And I think I lean more towards that, but they're very different beasts. And with documentaries, it's you think it might be easier to do, but it's really not, because there's a lot of moving parts in a documentary, and depending on what you're doing, honestly, it depends on what you're covering. But it could be extremely challenging in a totally separate kind of environment. It's almost like just the difference between making a song and making a movie. Like they're that different.
Right.
They're just very, very different things. Yeah. I mean, they
Well,
all
with
end up on film,
documentary, you
but
got to stay within the premises of what you're documenting. Really, there's no creative expression.
sure. Yeah. And you hope so. I mean, I've seen a lot of documentaries that really step outside and show their personal point of view, which in my opinion, you shouldn't be doing.
Right.
But the documentary that you're talking about right now on IMDb, Millennium After Millennium, that's less of something that's that's a documentary about a TV show. So it's not something that's more. It's not like we're documenting like real world problems or things like that, or like something that's happened. It's a little bit different. It's more of an entertainment documentary, but at the same time, those people that were a part of it, they're telling their story that happened 20 years ago on this thing that people still love today, and that's that's a story in of itself.
That's very cool.
Do you
Very cool.
just a question, do you have children? Like, do they watch any of your shows?
I do. And my entire family ends up in movies,
Okay.
whether they like it or not. Yeah. They're everybody's pretty creative. My wife started very young in entertainment. She was in commercials, and then she moved on to be a model, and then she's done a few movies with me. And my daughter is probably the one that could really be an actress, but she just has no desire to do it. And she's in Dark Winter, which is a movie we did probably back in like 2017 or something like this, 18 maybe. And my son is in that, and my wife Shawnee's in it, and then a couple close friends of ours are also in it. It was a very small, no budget thing that we made, and it turned out pretty well. But yeah, they see my movies. I don't think that they like them because they're not into filmmaking. Like, it's a totally different generation. When I was growing up, filmmaking was like the unicorn, for a lot of, like, even people that weren't wanting to be filmmakers, it was still like that. Wow, that is really cool. How do you get into that? It's so elusive. But nowadays it's like everybody's a filmmaker, so there's no desire, there's no magic really to it anymore. And so my kids just really don't care about it at all. Like, it's just a different sort of thing. Like, they used to come with me on set, and now they're just like, I don't want to go. They've seen it all. They don't care anymore, but if I wish that I was their age when I first, got my taste of it, because, oh my God, that would have been amazing. Right.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because my son and I were talking about that a couple of weeks ago. We were, we would sometimes watch like the 10-minute bits of the whole, Brad and Amber, crap that was going on. Right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And my son, he would see a couple of minutes of it, and he'd come down and, hey, did you see this? And I was like, yeah, I saw that, or, whatever. We were kind of sharing some of it. And it's interesting because we were talking about that, and it was very similar to, what you were just saying is like, back in the day, people like Elvis, Monroe, or even more in our generation when we look, um, at some of the stars, it would be crazy. Fans everywhere, millions of people everybody waving their autograph books, And now, I mean, I have, quite a few stars on my Twitter. I actually do readings for celebrities. You know what I mean? It's a different
Mm-hmm.
interaction now than it used to be. Now it's more okay.
Yeah, there's less of that glamour to it, which is strange to me.
Yeah.
Like I understand it. Like, so my kids grew up with me being around certain people, like not necessarily like A-list actors or anything like that, but people that were known in the industry. So to them, it's like, oh, that's cool. We get to meet that person. Oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
cool. And then my kid would just come up to me and be like, hey, let's go meet Harrison Ford. And I'm like, well, yeah, that would be great. How are we going to do that? And to him, it was just like normal. Or
Yeah.
when he was first getting into music, he was, really latched on to Tom Petty. And he's like, hey, Dad, can we meet Tom Petty? And I'm like, probably not.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's this thing where it's like, oh, okay, but for them, it's just a different dynamic, it's really strange.
I was telling my son, we used to party, because we're in Edmonton and I grew up with the Oilers. I mean, and before they were famous, we used to go to the bar, and I don't even know how many times I got Gretzky's autograph and kept losing it. And I'd go back to him the next week and I'd be like, drunk or something because I was like 18, I'd be like, I need your autograph again because I lost it. And he'd laugh at me and he's like, oh my God, Kathy, like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know, whatever.
Right.
And if I had kept any of them, they were all on coasters, and by the end of the night, they were probably beer soaked, and but that like, and now he's like, holy crap, he used to party with Gretzky. I was like, I wouldn't party with him, but he was in the same bar that we were.
Yeah, I mean that's like, great. I think that's really cool because they're people, right?
Yeah,
they do the same things we do, like and I think that's honestly how my kids view it. I think that's maybe how this whole generation is. They look at the idea or that concept that I think that Generation X sort of made, which is this world of YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all that, where normal people can be famous for, in some cases, for no apparent reason, just for entertaining people. And I think that's really great in certain ways. And I think that they've just been around that enough to where people, that I guess we would have considered famous aren't famous in the same way. It's really hard to kind of wrap our head around, really. But for them, it's just everyday life, I guess,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and social media and all of that has brought so many people closer. And, you could be talking to somebody in the Bay Area and like somebody else in Montreal or Toronto or whatever. Right. And it's so immediate, and everybody's interconnected now, where before, prior to the internet, it was sort of unreal to be able to do that. So, but listen, I've got another question for you, because I'm just fascinated that you're a filmmaker. And I often wonder, especially with filmmakers, there is this desire for stories to be told, and told in sort of a specific way, a certain way, I guess. I don't know, maybe that's wrong, but I don't think so, because, you're a filmmaker, but you're also a storyteller. And I'm just wondering, sort of, is there something that you are now dying to say? I mean, what's next for you? What is sort of something that you're really wanting to sink your teeth into right now?
So it's interesting how you approach that, because I do think that filmmakers want to tell stories in specific ways. but I don't think that filmmakers want to tell stories in the same way as other filmmakers. I
No.
think the only way that or reason that happens, because it does happen and more times than not, is because of the money cycle. Hollywood, there's this term cookie cutter like scripts and cookie cutter films, because they know what works and what is going to make money. So there is a way that the audience easily digests a film in the same way that they easily digest, say, pop music.
Right.
There is a format to it, and I think that probably hinders filmmakers more than anything in terms of telling the story the way that they want to, because you do have to think about your audience. Otherwise, it's kind of, why are you doing this? Why are you going to tell the story? Is it just for you? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, even George Lucas has said it. I'm making movies now for me, and he does.
Right.
He makes movies still. They don't get released to the public. They're for him, and that's totally fine. But if you have something that you want to say to the world, you have to kind of fit it into this formula so that it's easily digestible in a way. And that's not to say that the general public is dumb. It's just to say that we've learned over time how to accept content in a certain way. And I think that if filmmakers had their ability to tell a story the way that they want to, it would be drastically different. We'd be seeing more, stuff like David Lynch, if you're familiar with his stuff. There would be more strangeness to the world, because I don't think people, I think everybody sort of has this non-normal perception about certain things in life. And I think that's where filmmakers really want to express those ideas across in stories. And that's where you get content like, Eraserhead or Twin Peaks or things like that. They're very strange, otherworldly sort of ideas that are trying to be packaged to the masses. So filmmakers really have to kind of fit into a bubble, unfortunately, but it is what it is. It's no different than pop music or any other sort of popular art forms. For me, there's, and again, this is not just me. It's really any filmmaker, I think, or any artist. There's always things that you want to do. There's always things in the pipeline, things that you wish that you could do, you can't get off the ground, or think that deserve more money in order to tell the story properly. Because it's more than just this idea of being able to tell a good story. Like if you take Dark Winter that I spoke about a little bit ago, like we made this movie for $1,500. It was nothing. It was like literally like gas money and some food. That's nothing. But we knew that this type of story would never get any kind of funding. It was just too weird. Right. And you can even tell by the reviews. We told it the way we wanted to tell it. And if you look at the reviews, 90% of people don't get it, or they look at it as, this low budget side of it as like, this is a bad movie because they didn't have money kind of thing. Well, it's a story we wanted to tell. So we told it in, the way we wanted to with the resources we have for that particular movie. And sometimes you'll have a budget like, a movie like Story of Eva. Another crazy kind of tale about revenge, that just is told in the director's. I didn't direct that movie, but I helped produce it. And it's a really kind of a crazy story. So it's hard for people to latch onto in terms of, pop culture, like people being able to view it as a normal movie. So some people have a hard time digesting it, but it had a big budget. So, you know what I mean? And it's like, to me, budgets don't really matter in terms of that. And you could have tons of movies. If you tell a story the way that you want to, opposed to the way the general, population perceives movies, it's probably not going to be terribly successful. Even David Lynch's movies aren't terribly successful. But for me, there's a particular story that we've been rolling around quite a bit since the inception of Resurrection Films back in like 2016, whatever it was, 2015, called Room 19. That Carly Street, my partner and one of my partners in the company, wrote years ago. And this movie isn't strange or weird or needs to be told in a weird way. The problem with this movie and getting funding right now is that it deals with sexuality, and it deals with transsexual elements and sex changes and different things like that. But it's a very personal story about a father and his daughter. Um, and there are lots of paranormal elements in the film. And some people that have been attached to this project that were going to put in quite a bit of money just wanted to change those elements because I don't want to suspect why, but
Right.
there's just certain things like that that just happen. It's really hard sometimes to get a movie made if it's, I don't want to say taboo. I think that's wrong because I really think the world is changing in a lot of ways that is helpful. But it's still really tough to get projects like that made. On the other hand, if I had a straightforward like horror film, that probably wouldn't be a problem at all.
Right.
But again, I mean, I don't necessarily want to make those kinds of movies. Like the stuff that I'm making right now with my team are a little bit different. They're a little bit strange. If you look at Collapse or Dark Winter or Story of Eva, things like that, they're a little bit different, and we're really proud of those. Whether the audience is receptive to it or not, maybe someday they will be, but we're more proud of the way that we're telling the stories and what we're accomplishing than anything. And Room 19 is going to be one of those films.
Right.
We've had, it didn't even, we've had names attached to this thing. We've had $5 million attached to it. And it's like, they want to change this core element. And Carly's like, that's not happening. This is the story that we set out to tell. This is the way it's going to be. I don't care if they give us $1 billion. Well, she might change her mind with that, but she's very steadfast, and I agree with her. And I think that the whole team does. And it's one of those projects where it's a passion project for us. And that's really what, I can't wait to tell. And we're constantly looking at ways to do this. It's one of those projects we feel deserves a decent small budget. And that's really all we're after. And we're really hoping that we can make that happen. Cause there's some great family aspects to it. And there's some great paranormal pieces to it that tell this story that I think is very, very valid in today's world, especially what's been happening over the past few years,
Mm-hmm.
So I really can't wait to get that off the ground and moving.
Do you find cancel culture kind of plays a part in that, or a lot of, or some of the aspects of it? Because it seems to be, unless you're going with a certain narrative, agenda, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
cancel culture tends to take over.
Well, the thing with cancel culture, it's sort of after the fact. So you have to be careful. And I think it's kind of sad. I don't think anybody needs to be judged on any one thing that they say.
Yeah.
I mean, people make mistakes, people change. I don't
Absolutely,
feel
100%.
that. Yeah, I just don't feel like that's something that needs to be happening. People can be held accountable for something that they've done, but I don't think that should ruin their career or their life or their family or any of that kind of stuff. I think the general public that latches onto that kind of stuff is really taking it too far, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I don't know why that's happening.
They'll
but
take it too far until they're canceled for something that they've done.
Yeah, I mean, really,
and it's a whole different perspective.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. And so I think cancel culture hurts you after the fact in a lot of ways, and it's hard to know when you're messing up today. Like it's really hard to navigate some of the what's considered politically correct or just morally correct in a lot of
that
ways.
changes on a day-to-day basis right now too.
Exactly. Or even depends on who you're speaking to at the moment. It could be drastically different than another person's idea of what is politically correct or morally correct. And
absolutely,
at some point you kind of just have to step back and, decide, do I say what I feel, or do I try to fit into that box and have a career, or whatever it might be for any of these people, and so you were talking about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard a bit ago, and I really applaud Johnny Depp, not because I think he's a great person, because I don't. I think a lot of the stuff that we saw in that trial makes him in a lot of ways just as bad as Amber Heard, but he was willing to say, "This is who I am."
He was willing to
I
expose. He was willing to expose a lot
Mhm,
of personal, details in order to get the truth out. And
absolutely.
there's if you want to go down to moral judgment, like I don't know if there's really a breaking point in there, because morally, whatever, again, depends on where your morals are or
Mhm,
whatever. But again, that's going to change per person. It's going to change per perception, whatever. Um, but you're right. Like, there was a lot of being able to come out publicly and do what he did.
mhm,
I think it changes the perception for a lot of people, and especially, for men who haven't had the opportunity to really say, look, at this is what's going on. Men have had to suck it up
sure,
for,
yeah,
you know
yeah.
women
I
have
think,
too, but in a
well,
different, in a different perspective, I guess.
I think women have they've I can't pretend to like understand, to be honest with you. I really can't, because I
Right.
see certain things. My wife just finished her BA in psychology, and there was a lot of different types of films and psychological videos and things that I've watched with her,
Yeah.
and there's lots of stuff that I've learned about uh, things that women have had to go through over time, and it's honestly, it's insane. And I don't know any other way to put it. It's really crazy, the things that women have had to fight for, basic rights and
Absolutely.
whatever else.
Absolutely.
So I don't necessarily feel bad for men as a whole
Right.
because of that. But if you look at the individual and what's happening, and I think that that's an important aspect, is to any given situation, it's important to look at the individual and what's going on, because I mean, there's bad men, there's bad women, like
Yeah.
it's a thing. But sometimes circumstances matter. Sometimes how you grew up, matters. Sometimes how the other person reacts to you and the things that they do matters.
Yeah.
And that changes things. And again, I don't necessarily think that he is a great person. He's done his fair share of things, but the willingness and the openness to say, "Hey, this is who I am. I'm not trying to hide it." Maybe he's remorseful or sorry for certain aspects of things that he's done. That's understandable, and I commend him for that. As to where, with Amber Heard, I just I don't know. It's really hard. I don't want to judge her in a lot of ways. Like, the internet is going crazy, and they cut these videos together that are completely out of context. If you watch like the longer versions, you can just see the way people are trying to portray certain things, and it's just so nuts.
My
And,
dog
and
stepped
people
on a
believe it.
flea.
Yeah, it's comedy, but I mean, at the same time, like, there's certain things that are just like, that's not how that happens. I watched that whole video. That didn't happen that way, but that's funny. So you got to be really careful with cancel culture, in my opinion. I don't think that it really should be a thing to begin with. I do think people should be held accountable to a certain extent, but I
Yeah.
don't think at all it should be ruining people's, even somebody that maybe is misogynistic or takes advantage of a woman, I mean, that stuff should be looked at.
Yes.
But that's between them, in a way, and whether it's in between them and a court of law, or between them and the entity or the people that they work for, or whatever it is, it's not between them and the world unless they want it to be. And I don't think that people's judgment of the situation by only seeing certain pieces of things helps anything. I don't think it helped Me Too at all. I don't think that. I think it hurt it. I think that sort of element really, really hurt something that was very timely and needed to happen. And it unfortunately, I
But
think in some ways self-imploded.
It's kind of like with any large movement, really, if we look at any large movement, there's going to be a good premise behind it, but it's going to get turned into something that is very disproportionate in how it's viewed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you look at it, with the Me Too movement, a lot of things that happen is like, every man is bad. Every man that says this, every man that says this word, every man that does this action, every man that, and it's like, okay, you know what? I'm okay if somebody says, "Hey, you look pretty today." I don't think I need to slap a lawsuit on them for that.
Yeah, and
I don't
I
need to
think
publicly announce them as some sort of,
mhm,
whatever. But it went this way instead of being where it should have been, is being able to give that voice to people who really suffered and went through a lot of abuse, whether it be
mhm,
sexual, mental, or emotional. And it's sort of the same thing. And I think that as we progress, hopefully a lot of this cancel culture can be, because there's very much a sheep mentality right now. And it's
mm,
unfortunate because that kind of brings in through the filmmaking too. It's like one person comes up with, oh, you can't watch that because this would be misogynistic, this would be this would be that, this, and it kind of expands. And then all of these people that are prone to that, um oh, I have to listen to the internet type of mentality. The
oh
internet
yeah,
must be right. The stranger that I've never had a conversation with, obviously they're right.
yeah,
And it seems to spread from there instead of it's kind of like reviews, whether it's a hotel or whether it's a movie, right?
mhm,
One person might have a great experience at that hotel, but they've seen a crappy review and they're like, oh, I guess I better put a crappy review because of the fact that this this person said that, or there was 5 bad reviews. I got to go with
mhm,
the norm, or I got to go with the, and it's really hard for people to be that individual self now. And that's where filmmakers such as yourself, like ones that are willing to expand beyond those borders, are so important. I feel like they're so important because what, I might not like something, Lynda might not like something, we might like different things, but
mhm.
that doesn't change the fact that we're good or decent or moral or whatever it
Oh
is. We're
sure,
just
yeah.
have different perspectives on everything,
Yeah,
right?
even if you have different perspectives on what's politically correct or morally correct or whatever that is, we can still coexist. We can have different ideas. Or I think we saw a lot of that with 2016 elections and things
Absolutely.
like that.
Yeah.
Um, that got really wild. But I mean, if you take some of the last several films that I made, like Story of Eva, Collapse, Dark Winter, we have some very all 3 of those movies have very strong female-led characters,
Yeah.
and that's something that we didn't set out to do per se. It wasn't something where we sat down and say, "Hey, let's make women-oriented films," or let's,
Mhm.
it was just it just happened, and I'm proud of what we've done. I think it's really very cool because there's not a lot of that happening even still today. You'll see
Right.
more women in the background directing films and
Yeah.
things like that, editors, and which I think is fantastic. The problem with that is, though, unfortunately, is if they fail, it's like 10 steps back, which is
Right.
terrible. If a man fails, they can bounce back with the next movie, and it's kind of sickening.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that. I really don't understand it. But I mean, that's the way the world is. But we are progressing, I think, as a whole, and I think that's good. But um, this cancel culture thing, maybe it's a stepping stone. Maybe we had to have that and falter in that aspect in order to move on and do better. I don't know.
Right.
I'm not really sure. It's unfolding in front of us right now.
It's funny because if you look at some of the 80s movies, and which were, some of them were just brilliantly made, but some,
Hmm.
they had that horror comedy to them, but it was always, you always knew it was going to be the half naked blonde that was
Hmm.
killed.
Right, yeah. And I mean that was the staple. Like
Yeah.
Friday the 13th really set that off with the if you have sex in a film, you're going to die kind of thing. Um,
Absolutely.
but then you have other, even into comedies, even like people love to bash on John Hughes movies these days. And
Yeah.
it's like those were such seminal pieces of film at the time for that generation that it was just a different time. Like it was that kind of like aspects were the reason why they were written is because that's what was happening, at the time. Like it wasn't meant to be misogynistic necessarily or not politically correct or whatever it is. It's just that's the way it was. And if you go back even further, like the 1940s with film noir, like that, those dark pictures happened because of the Great Depression and war and all that other stuff. And like
Right.
people didn't realize it was happening at the time. But now, almost 100 years later, we're seeing that, and we can look back on it and we can see like that was a product of the time because of what was happening in the world. And
Absolutely.
I think that 20 years from now, I think we'll be able to look back on Me Too and all of this cancel culture type stuff, and we're either going to say, yeah, that was a step in the right direction, or wow, what the hell were we thinking? But it's there now. It's set in stone. We've made history at some point, for better or worse.
Well, and if you look at it, I mean, like you said, from 2016 to now, there's been a lot of different movements. There's been a lot of political jumps in different directions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
mean, just the idea that we have to have a Me Too or Black Lives Matter movement is just like,
why should we even have to have that? Because this should just be part of the norm, and people should just be called out individually, upon their behavior. Or why are we even dealing with racism?
But it speaks volumes. Right? Obviously, it needed to happen because I mean, if people felt that it needed to happen, and that's it is what it is, and hopefully that we as people learn.
Like you said too, it's if a woman producer, a woman director, does. If it's not, it's still that movement backwards, and it's there's so many different aspects all over the place too.
Oh yeah.
I could talk about it all night.
Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting because just the other day I was watching silly TV, and it was hilarious because I was watching Match Game 75, and there was this big disclaimer that came on the screen beforehand saying this was a product of its time. When you're watching it, right?
Oh yeah.
Of course, but it was hilarious. Okay, so Jason, I have to ask you this because I got a message on my phone from my friend Janet, who is very enamored with your work, and she wants to know, I think this is hilarious. She said, well, this is, an I Want to Believe show. And I think I would like to ask him how he feels about television, and in particular, paranormal television. And does he have any favorites? Does he watch it? Does he care?
Janet, thank you. I like paranormal movies more than I like paranormal television, such as like Ghost Hunters.
Right.
For a very particular reason. Those shows I think are, and I don't know, I've never worked on one of like,
where
like
you're going with that is 100% correct, but yes, go ahead.
I feel like there's so much falsity to them that they're hard to take serious at times. Like, I think some of the things that they do are intriguing, but not enough. I can never sit down and like watch one of those shows regularly. However, I do work on the show We Want to Believe, not this podcast, but the Joe Blow documentary show.
And that's actually what Peter says. He did say Jason has been an exceptional talent on producing our show We Want to Believe. Yes.
Thank you, Peter.
We did want you to know that your work is truly appreciated.
That's nice to hear. And the thing about We Want to Believe is they have a very specific mission statement that I hear a lot of flack from certain people, and it's understandable, but they have a very specific mission statement, which is to not falsify anything, to show what happens, whether they get something or not. And I think that's intriguing in of its own, because to be honest, as many episodes as we've done now, I think it's been like 2 years that this has been going on. We're going on 3 maybe. And there's some very intriguing things that have happened to these guys that are, I know when you watch the show, you'd be like, yeah, whatever. But I mean, I'm seeing the raw footage,
right?
And I get to edit that, and I try to edit it in as much of a compelling way without falsifying anything as possible, which can be tricky. because when these guys sit around in these places for 5-6 hours at a time, and you hear one or two blips, that's a lot of footage to go through. And that's a lot for them to go through.
Yeah.
So that becomes very exciting when that happens. You know, if Peter is sitting there and says, "Can you talking to a spirits, and can you tell me how many people are in the room right now?" And he gets feedback on the spirit box that says 7. And he goes around and counts, and there's 6 of them. And if you count the spirit, that's kind of like, wow. I mean, take it for what it is, but that's the kind of thing where that did happen. We're not falsifying anything. That really happened. Whether you take it for what it, as it being a spirit, or not, or just random. I mean, that's for you to decide. And I think that that's the charm of We Want to Believe. It's like, you can decide whether you believe in these things or not.
Right.
And I think that the crew of We Want to Believe, they want to believe, and they're there, especially people like Sean, where he doesn't believe. And I love this little quote that he does in the show where he's like, "I don't believe, but I want to. I'm here to see what happens." And I love that about him. Like, I think that that's the way everybody should be. We're all scientists from birth, trying to figure things out. And I really look at paranormal, as a science. Like, it really is. I think it's we're being scientists. We're going out there and trying to discover things. So of all the paranormal type shows on TV, like, obviously I'm a fan of things like the X-Files.
Right.
But if we're talking documentary style stuff like Ghost Hunters and stuff, I don't care for them, but I do like We Want to Believe, because there's an honesty, there's a truth to it that I think that those shows are missing, and they could use more of. So if you guys out there haven't checked out that show on the Paranormal Network, you really should, because it's just more honest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I've watched it a few times, and it's very impressive. And of course, knowing Pete, knowing Jason, all of that, like, it's been, I've gone on a few investigations with Pete in the past, and it's very straightforward. It's very honest. There's no bullshit. Like, you don't.
Yeah, no. They're the first to be like, that probably was nothing. Oh, that was my stomach, probably, whatever it is. Like, they're the first to really say it. And there's even been times where I've gone through the footage and I've found things that they didn't find.
Right.
And it's like, I've sent clips to Jason. I'm like, "Dude, did you hear this?" And he's like, "No." Like, "Okay, I got to send you the clip," and it's like, it's crazy sometimes, because, sometimes they don't even catch things that happen. It's really fascinating.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so definitely, people check it out on YouTube, because it's on the Paranormal Network. And how often does it come on?
All of the paranormal shows are once a month.
Okay.
And I don't think it has a set day,
Right?
but that kind of changes depending on what's happening with the network. But every show that's on there is once a month, whether it's Haunted Objects or We Want to Believe or whatnot. But you know what? Go there, subscribe, and if you click on the bell, they'll notify you like when a new episode comes out, which is probably the best feature of YouTube. I can't keep up on it. Like, I don't even know sometimes when the show gets posted, and so I get that little notification. I'm like, okay, cool, I'm gonna check it out, because you want to look at your own work sometimes. See who's watching, how many people are viewing.
Yeah. For sure.
We just want to thank you so much for being on the show with us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's been a pleasure to meet you. We were looking forward to we were literally looking forward to the show, and again, thanks so much.
No, thank you for having me on here. I think this is what you guys are doing is pretty cool. So keep doing it. Yeah.
We will. Thank you. And everybody who's watching, please make sure you click subscribe. Please make sure that you click the notification bell. We do try to be here every Sunday. So thanks again for watching, everyone. Take care. And thanks again, Jason. So appreciated.
Yeah. In the words of Peter, stay spooky.
Yeah. And we'll get better.